to the morning show, ladies and gentlemen. We are absolutely honored to welcome an author whose imagination and storytelling have made him one of the most successful authors in the world. But you see, it's in the DNA. It's in the DNA, it's in the style of his legendary father, Dick Francis. Ladies and gentlemen, Felix Francis joins us this morning for a chat about the continuation of the wonderful, amazing thrillers. Good morning, Felix. Nice to have you with us.
Good morning. Lovely to be with you.
Thank you so very much. Casey, say good morning to Felix.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Casey. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
And I want you to know my first name is Philip, and when you derive the meaning from ancient Greek, it means lover of horses.
Oh, well, that's good news, Philip.
You're in a friendly stable with us. I'd like to begin by truly from our hearts paying tribute to one of the world's most successful authors, your late father, Dick Francis.
Oh, that's very kind of you.
What a fortunate son you are, Felix, to have had such an extraordinary father.
Well, not only was he a great author, but before that he'd been a champion steeplechase jockey, and he'd ridden horses for the Queen and the Queen Mother in England, and before that he'd been a wartime RAF pilot. So who needs comic book heroes when you have a father like that?
How true. Oh, my goodness. I had no idea.
Great stories.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I think his bold life equaled his bold, wonderful imagination. We'll get into that. But the sport of kings, horse racing.
Indeed.
It kept your father's storytelling, best-selling art for 50 years? Is that?
Well, it's now 50 books. In fact, it's more than 50 years. But there was an event which occurred back in 1956, which probably defined his life, which was he was riding a horse for the Queen Mother in England in the world's greatest steeplechase, the Grand National.
Oh, wow.
And, I mean, in England, the Grand National is a bit like the World Series and the Super Bowl all rolled into one.
Yes.
Everyone watches it.
Yes.
And my father rode a horse called Devon Lock, and it's a 4.5-mile race over 30 huge jumps, and he jumped all the jumps, and he'd gone all but 40 yards of the 4.5 miles, and the horse collapsed underneath him when he was about to win.
Oof.
And my father says it was the noise of the crowd cheering home the Queen Mother's horse, which frightened the horse. But that one event rather defined his life. He was always worried he'd be known as the man who didn't win the Grand National.
Oh,
but
my
actually,
goodness.
It was that event which set him off on writing. You know, first with his autobiography, and then with starting the Mysteries in 1962, and then there was one every year for the rest of the millennium.
Life is so serendipitous, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Did you start writing with your father to create a new series? Not a new series, but new books under orders, I believe. Is that the first one you worked with your father with?
It is. It was actually it was published as a Dick Francis novel, and it was all that, you know, you said about serendipity. Well, it was a bit serendipitous how I got into it, because my father's agent asked me for lunch, and he said we have a problem that no one is reading the books because there hasn't been a new book for 5 years, and everyone has forgotten about them. And he said, what we need is a new book. Mm-hmm. And I said that you weren't going to get one. My father was now 85, and my mother, who'd helped him with them, was no longer with us, sadly. So,
is that why he stopped writing?
Yeah, well, it was partly. They decided to retire, and then my mother only lived another month after that. It's not a good advert for retirement. But the agent said to me, no, what I want to do is to ask an existing crime writer to write a new Dick Francis book. And I'd obviously had a few glasses of red wine, because I said to him, well, before you ask anyone else, Andrew, I would like to have a go. And he didn't roll his eyes and say, well, why do you think an ex-physics teacher can write a Dick Francis book? He simply said, I'll give you a couple of months to write 2 chapters. And,
2 chapters.
He was.
and I suddenly became a full-time author, and the latest book, called Damage, is, well, I now consider it to be my 9th.
Oh, my goodness.
And it's the 50th.
Oh, this is the 50th.
This is the 50th book, yes.
Yes.
There's a few more than 50 years, but it is the 50th Francis book.
50th book in the franchise, Dick Francis's Damage, a suspense thriller published by G.P. Putnam's Sons. And tell us a little of what mystery lies ahead in Damage for our listeners.
Well, Damage is the main character, and I write in the first-person narrative, so it's seen through the eyes of the character. His name is Jeff Hinckley. He's actually Jefferson Hinckley, and he's an undercover investigator for the British Horse Racing Authority. That is the organisation which controls racing. And it starts off at Cheltenham Racecourse with him following a disgraced trainer, a racehorse trainer, who then proceeds to murder someone in full view of everybody else. And then the book progresses to the fact that horses have been drugged, and not just 1 or 2, but all of them.
A conspiracy?
And someone is trying to destroy the integrity of British racing.
Ooh.
And is trying to extort money from the organisation, and murder and mayhem tag along for the ride.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Oh, it sounds fascinating.
Well, it is about racing, but you don't need to know anything about racing, certainly not about British racing, in order to enjoy it. Some people say, oh, I don't read your books, they're all about horses, but they're not. They're all about people, and racing is simply the canvas against which I paint the story.
Oh, you completely ripped the question from my voice. I was going to ask you, now, is this something that you need to know about racing people to understand the story? And you completely answered the question before I even got the chance to ask it.
You might learn a bit about racing, but
well, that's good.
And I hope that you'll be interested in it. And indeed, my father was inaugurated into the British Horse Racing Hall of Fame.
Congratulations.
And the citation didn't say, here's the man who didn't win the Grand National. It said, for introducing more people to British steeplechasing worldwide than any other person.
Oh, what an honor.
That's amazing.
That was brilliant.
You know, it is how a fall can actually turn into a triumphant victory.
Yeah, well, my
beautiful.
father thought that after it, he had to go and see the Queen and the Queen Mother. He thought he was going to be sent off to the Tower of London to lose his head. But in fact, and he was also worried that the Queen Mother wouldn't continue with her racing because it would put her off, but not a bit of it. 2 things happened. One is she kept lots of horses the rest of her life, and also my father and she were great friends for the rest of their lives.
How wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, I can't tell you what a delight and a personal honor it is for us to welcome Felix Francis, who, excuse me, Felix, who has written Dick Francis's Damage. This is your, and you said it, was it 11th?
No, my 9th.
9th. Going on 11.
Yeah, I'm working on I've already started number 10.
Oh, I was going to good. Yeah.
Which all being well will be published next October in the United States.
God willing. Good. You know, you were mentioning your beloved father. How did the father and son teamwork go?
Well, I have to say I did most of the writing, but he would put me right with various things, and he'd correct the racing when I got it wrong. I mean, since he died, my brother is the first one to read the books because he's much more actively involved in horse racing than I am, just to make sure that I don't get the racing wrong. But we would discuss things and plots and ways forward. But by the time I was working with him, my father was quite elderly, and so it would be me that was doing most of the actual writing, but I was taking good notice of the counsel of my father, who After all, he'd been doing it a lot longer than I had.
Oh, surely. I promise I won't tell a soul, but did your father ever tell you, Felix, rewrite this?
Well, not quite in such few words, but maybe. But yeah. He was very pleased. He was very excited that the franchise was continuing, and he was very pleased that I was doing it. I mean, there were some members of my family who perhaps thought that I was cashing in on the name rather, and I remember saying to my agent that I was slightly worried about that, and he said, "Don't be ridiculous, you're giving your father immortality." Well, I'm maybe not doing that, but I was certainly extending the lifetime and of the Dick Francis books. And the greatest thing is that I only started in order to give all those wonderful back books a bit of a boost, and they have all been republished and rejacketed.
Oh, wow.
And are back on sale in all the stores in England this year. So
this is like a business being passed down from generation to generation.
Yeah. Well, my mother always used to call it the family business.
There you go.
There's a book which has a physics teacher in it, and that was based on me at the time. And there's a book about racehorse transport, and my brother runs a big racehorse transport business in England.
Interesting.
And every member of the family who had anything interesting their story was used. Mm-hmm. And my uncle was a wine importer, and my parents wrote a book called Proof, which was all about the wine business. My father always said that it was the book he enjoyed researching most. He'd researched it for 40 years.
You know what I find in you, Felix, is you not only have the style of your beloved father, plus there's an added sense of energetic humor and youth.
Well, I like to think so, yes. I do like to think that they are slightly lighter, more amusing, and more up-to-date.
Yeah.
But, everyone says, why did you copy your father's style? But I didn't really. I was 8 years old when the first book was published. Mm-hmm. Discussion at home would not be about who was doing what about taking the children to school. It would be more of whether Sid Halley could survive the night with a 38 slug in his gut, or how much high explosive it was required to blow up a little aeroplane. But I grew up with it. I mean, as I said, I was 8 when the first novel was published. And there was a new novel every year for the next 38 years. So I learned the style, you might say, at my father's knee and beyond. And my mother was a great believer in the rhythm of sentence. Mm-hmm. And I worked, and she taught me what she meant by that. And I tried to incorporate it. It's when the words slip off the page easily. And I mean, some reviewers have rather disparagingly said, well, the Francis books, they're just easy reading. But I tell you, we work very hard to make them easy reading.
Absolutely.
I love it when people come up to me, as I was an event here I'm staying in Virginia at the moment and doing a book tour, and I loved it in an event last night when someone said to me, "You kept me up until 5 o'clock in the morning yesterday." And part of me thinks, oh my goodness, it took me a whole year to write the book, and
what
they read it in one night. But actually, that is what you want.
Of course, that's what you want. We have a minute or so left, Felix.
Yes.
In that time, I do want to ask you about, did your wonderful father ever leave you any notes before he passed?
I wish.
Any wishes? Did he leave any wishes for the series?
I wish he left a few plots. That's always the most difficult thing to come up with. But he used them all. But I think he left me more than just a few notes. He left me a legacy. He left me something to live up to, and I'm trying my best.
And finally, I would like you to write a note, a Post-it note, and stick it to the sugar shaker for children 75 years away from today. What will that Post-it note say to them?
Well, I hope that it might say, go and get a book, and that books will still exist. Books have been through a bad time recently, and and electronics are taking over. But I hope that the paper pages will still be there in 75 years. So my advice would be to go and seek out a good book and immerse yourself and allow your imagination to run wild while reading someone else's lovely words.
Thank you so very much for this honor.
Well, Philip, thank you.
Thank you so much. Felix Francis, ladies and gentlemen.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. And
I love it.
Lover of horses. I started with the sport of kings, and it's actually the sport of queens that we end with the Queen Mother there. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are a fan of Dick Francis's fabulous series, then I want you to go out, and his latest, written by Felix Francis, is Dick Francis's Damage, suspense thriller that is now available online at your favorite local bookstore and wherever great books are sold.